And I am back. Yes, indeed, Auntie.
Pod Save America and Pod Save the World, and the spokesman for President Obama's National Security Council, Tommy Vitor. Tommy, thanks for joining me.
Good to see you, Brian.
So we have watched as Donald Trump has kind of devolved into this very defensive posture as more and more people are repeating the reporting that came from Trump's own intel assessments, his own intelligence community, that says that there may have not been obliteration of Iran's nuclear facilities, as Donald Trump keeps claiming. And so I'm curious what you take out of this moment where you have this morning Pete Hegseth attacking a Fox News reporter, Jennifer Griffin, who by the way, I've met, and she is one of the few people who I only have good things to say about somebody who works at Fox, but she's a consummate professional. What do you take out of that moment this morning where he just decided to attack her for daring not toe the party line and just heap praise onto Dear Leader?
Yeah, I mean, she's literally doing her job, just asking questions, asking critical ones about this massive bombing campaign we just launched with Iran. So it's shocking that he would just unload like that. I mean, what happened was Donald Trump went out hours after the United States military dropped these bombs on Iran and said that their nuclear program had been totally obliterated. And that was obviously bullshit at the time because he didn't know.
Nobody didn't know.
Like, no one had any time to, like, go to the site, look at satellite imagery, fly a drone, talk to confidential sources, right? Like, no one in the world knew whether Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated at that point, including to, like, go to the site, look at satellite imagery, fly a drone, talk to confidential sources, right? Like, no one in the world knew whether Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated at that point, including the Iranians. But now, because Dear Leader said totally obliterated, the entire administration has been tasked with making those words true after the fact by distorting intelligence and berating reporters for no reason.
Lying.
So to what extent do you feel like this is a face-saving mission? Because, in fact, if it's true that Iran did have plenty of advance notice because the one guy with the biggest platform in the United States of America could not shut the fuck up about an impending attack and kept teasing this idea that something big was coming, tune in next week on NBC to find out. Like, this is his whole mentality. So now there's all this reporting that there were vehicles that were transporting the 60% enriched uranium out of those facilities. And so does it then become an issue of, okay, the only reason that it actually wasn't obliterated was because they had enough advance notice because the one guy who's in charge of the military, the commander-in-chief, who had a vested interest in being quiet about it, showing some discretion about it, couldn't shut up. And so now, kind of the reason that this wasn't successful, if it's true that it wasn't obliterated, is because of Donald Trump himself.
I think there was someone quoted in the New York Times who said, a military official, saying the greatest threat to operational security was Trump's Truth Social feed.
Yeah.
So what I think probably happened was the Iranians knew this was going to happen. They knew the United States was going to swoop in and bomb these 3 nuclear sites. They have this stockpile of about 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium, enriched about 60% purity. To use it for a bomb, it needs to be 90% purity. And what they did with that stockpile, though, was just throw it into the trunk of a couple cars, drive it to different locations. It's very likely dispersed throughout Iran at this point. There's a Financial Times report out today that says European governments have been briefed on intelligence suggesting that Iran's stockpile was not bombed into the smithereens. It's not at the bottom of some rock pile at Fordo, that it's dispersed throughout the country. And that stockpile can still be used to make a nuclear weapon.
So do you think that if it's true, if the intelligence assessments and the reporting, and I think that this was all derived from like some leaked intel assessment of the damage, but again, there's still obviously more to come. It just happened 5 minutes ago, so we're still waiting on some more accurate assessment of what actually happened. But is there a world in which we are either the same or worse off than we were before? Because now not only did Iran's nuclear capabilities not get decimated, but now they have every incentive in the world not to engage in some diplomatic solution, but rather, knowing how hostile the U.S. and Israel were, they have every incentive in the world of trying to build up their nuclear capabilities so that that can serve as some deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, this has always been the risk of a military strike, which is that you can set back Iran's nuclear program, but you can't eradicate it. And I think the fear has always been that they look at North Korea, who has 50 nukes, maybe more, ICBMs that can hit the U.S., and you know what? They're not getting bombed.
Right.
They're getting love letters from Trump to Kim Jong-un, right? While Iran is getting bombed because they don't have that nuclear deterrent. So there's no doubt in my mind that the Israeli military campaign and the U.S. campaign set back Iran's nuclear program, right? If you were to ask, could they build back their program to what it was before these military actions started, it would undoubtedly take months, if not years. But
so you think the next like Ayatollah's next election, maybe he'll run on like Build Back Better or something like that?
Yeah, another BBB, the third BBB bill that we're all talking about. But yeah, but if the Iranians were able to take this stockpile somewhere, if they were able to sneak away a few centrifuges that can enrich the uranium from 60% purity to 90% purity, then they have what they need for a bomb. And that's always been the problem. And then what will likely happen next is they'll kick the IAEA out, the international inspectors that make sure that they're not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and then we'll have no eyes and ears into Iran besides what the intelligence community can do.
Why do you think, with all of these other autocrats and like dangerous world leaders, totalitarian leaders around the world, that in Iran, it's like the one country where Donald Trump hasn't sent love letters? I mean, he cozies up so hard to Putin and Kim Jong-un and President Xi in China. Mm-hmm. Why is the Ayatollah the one leader who has total control over that country that he's decided he's going to take a completely adversarial posture against? Is it because because his relationship with Bibi is just that much more important, so it supersedes any deference he would otherwise pay to Khomeini?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, it could be because Iran might be one of the few countries where Obama had cut a deal and had a cozier relationship, so he's just doing the opposite. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's part of this. Every president has always said Iran can't get a nuclear weapon because it would be viewed as completely destabilizing.
He can't keep Obama's name out of his mouth.
And it could lead to a nuclear arms race throughout the Gulf. If the Iranians get a nuclear weapon,
compare
the
to
Saudis
Obama's intelligence.
UAE is going to want one, right? So there's this concern that would lead to this massive nuclear proliferation. It's also 100% true that
because President Obama don't stoop to his level.
Enemy all along, and is clearly was pressuring Trump to get more involved in this military campaign. I mean, there were like giant banners and signs in Tel Aviv that said "Mr. Trump, finish the job." So yeah, I think it's several different factors at once.
I know this question might seem a little naive, but where do you go for accurate information now as it relates to these attacks, knowing that the federal government has just planted its flag in trying to kowtow to whatever Trump said, trying to retrofit reality into Trump's statements in the immediate aftermath of this attack? So he said it was obliterated. We're never going to get any public information that contradicts what Trump already said. And so how do you get to a point where, like, this isn't the kind of thing you can fuck around with? Because if we don't know the truth about whether or not Iran's nuclear capabilities are in fact obliterated, that just makes, if we engage in this make-believe reality where we just say whatever we have to say to make Donald Trump feel happy, like, that's not going to leave us any safer if in fact they do have nuclear capabilities, but we're still just putting our head in the sand and playing pretend. And so how do you move forward with any semblance of, like, how do you do this in a way that's responsible and safe, knowing that the federal government has already planted its flag in just trying to create some, manifest into reality what Trump has already said?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so frustrating about this. Trump went out, declared it had been totally obliterated, and now everyone has to toe that party line.
Right.
And so we're kind of all just waiting around from either leaks from whoever who saw U.S. intelligence, maybe Israeli intelligence leaks out. Clearly some sort of intel from these European governments has gotten out there. Maybe the IAEA will somehow gain access to these sites and be able to provide more information. Or maybe the Iranians in 2 or 3 months will decide to pop up and throw up the middle finger and say, actually, look, here's our stockpile. Here's all these centrifuges we had sitting around, like, F you, Mr. Trump. So we just don't know. We're kind of in, like, wait and see mode. It's a little bit of a purgatory.
Yeah. And finally, Tommy, Where can folks who are watching and listening right now see and hear more from you?
If you want to hear more about foreign policy, check out Pod Save the World. You can check it out on YouTube. Please subscribe. Or if you want to talk pure politics.
Today, the conservative majority on the United States Supreme Court ruled that states can effectively defund Planned Parenthood, the country's largest provider of reproductive health care. In a 6-3 ruling, the court changed federal law, allowing states to unilaterally cut off all Medicaid funding from Planned Parenthood, simply on the basis that it provides abortion care. Now, to be clear, abortion care only makes up 3% of Planned Parenthood services. It is a crucial 3%, but it's 3%. The other 97% covers things like cancer screenings, STD testing and treatment, gynecological care, all general health care. That makes today's ruling the latest blow not only to reproductive rights here in America, but also to health care for lower-income families who largely rely on programs like Medicaid. Right now, the Senate is also debating enormous cuts to Medicaid, which could include kicking Planned Parenthood out of the program entirely. Joining me now is New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. Governor, it's great to see you. This is such a tough topic, but I know you're grappling with this in your state. And I just wanted to read something from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent, she's one of my favorite dissent writers, I think everybody's, but she wrote this. Today's decision is likely to result in tangible harm to real people. More concretely, it will strip South Carolinians and countless other Medicaid recipients around the country of a deeply personal freedom, the ability to decide who treats us at our most vulnerable, which is very powerful. I talked a little bit about this, but help us understand what the broad impact of a ruling like this could be.
Right, well, I want to do two components of that, if I can, Jen. One is it continues to eliminate or limit dramatically access to basic primary care for women. And this is the part that we keep missing. And that means women have to travel further, they have to work harder to figure out basic reproductive care. Cervical cancer screenings, contraceptive access, and as you said, sexually transmitted disease screening and treatment. It's outrageous. But in addition, and maybe more stunning about this decision, is that we can use ideology to defund healthcare providers across America. I think all of us ought to be standing up and taking notice about what's really going on. It's discrimination against women. It's saying that women have no right to make any of their own healthcare decisions, and it continues to divide women and families in America.
It's particularly crushing for a range of reasons, including the ones you outlined, but also, I mean, this week was the 3rd anniversary of the Dobbs ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade and sent legislation of abortion back to the states. And since then, I mean, states like New Mexico have seen a huge increase, as you know much better than me and all of us, of out-of-state patients. How have you seen?
Tens of thousands. 250% and beyond from women who have to wait longer, have to take off work, have to find childcare for their kids if they already have children, and they have to find support to travel to New Mexico, garner access. If there are any other complications, then they have to wait until they can go home. And it's tens of thousands of women from states who have near total bans or total bans on abortion. And it's also having a toll on our current providers. I have funded now 2 stand-up clinics for primary reproductive health care, including abortion care in New Mexico. But we need the actual people, the clinicians, to provide the care and services. And here's the third problem with the Dobbs decision, 3rd year anniversary, current Supreme Court decision, is that but for the Democratic states who were standing up care for women, we now don't have enough providers. Like, we are eroding a clinical practice that's designed to, provide safe care for women, maternal care, and it's going to go away. Would you be an obstetrician in Texas? We already have a stunning shortage of these practitioners, OBGYNs in particular, across America. This is going to make this far worse.
Hold on. Playing right in our face.
So there has been a scandal at the Pentagon every single day since January 25th. I mean, every single day. Because every day since January 25th.
Oh, yeah, I saw him. Okay. I saw that one.
And some days,
I've heard that one. Hold on. What is this one? Yeah,
It is day 158 of the second Trump administration. Earlier today, senators finally got their first classified briefing on Donald Trump's Iran strikes from White House leaders, including Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio. At a news conference, the defense secretary praised the strikes while repeatedly attacking the media for reporting on an early intelligence report. And NBC News reports that the White House is now planning to limit intelligence sharing. This is important. Please pay attention. Limit intelligence sharing with members of Congress after that analysis was leaked earlier this week. My colleague Gabe Gutierrez has the details.
Tonight, the Pentagon revealing new details of that secretive mission, the B-2 bomber cruise that targeted Iranian nuclear sites with 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs.
When the crews went to work on Friday, they kissed their loved ones goodbye, not knowing when or if they'd be home.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying it was 15 years in the making, showing footage of the bombs being tested, saying it all went according to plan.
The weapons all guided to their intended targets.
Anyone with, two eyes, some ears, and a brain can recognize that kind of firepower with that specificity at that location and others is going to have a devastating effect.
It all comes after a leaked initial assessment
insult
from the Defense Intelligence Agency suggested Iran's nuclear program was set back by just months. But the agency also saying it had low confidence in its initial findings. Well, today, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog said the Iranian nuclear program has suffered enormous damage, and centrifuges at the Fordo site are no longer operational. The Joint Chiefs chairman revealing the B-2 pilot's own description of their nighttime mission's impact.
The pilot stated, quote, "This was the brightest explosion that I've ever seen. It literally looked like
but wasn't nothing there.
Despite
They already
just
moved
showing
it.
trucks outside a nuclear site the day before, today the president insisted Iran did not move any uranium. How can the president be so sure that no uranium was moved?
We were watching closely, and there was no indication to the United States that any of that enriched uranium was moved prior to the strike.
Quit lying. He was online
Let's get
trolling.
started with the help of our lead-off panel tonight. John Allen joins us, senior national politics reporter for NBC. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Michael Schnell, congressional reporter for The Hill. Peter, start us off with that news conference earlier today. It was interesting to say the least. On one hand, you have got Pete Hegseth in pure attack mode going after journalists, while the chairman of the Joint Chiefs spent 17 minutes explaining in detail exactly what the media is asking for, what the media did, how the operation worked, giving us actual information and context. What's your reaction to that split screen?
Well, look, Secretary Hegseth is performing for an audience of one, right? The president has already made clear that he's angry about that intelligence report. He's choosing to blame the media for reporting accurately on what that intelligence report said, whether the intelligence was correct or not, whether the intelligence is supplanted by further intelligence later, whether other intelligence agencies come up with a different conclusion. That doesn't change the reporting by the media, but the media is a convenient target. It always is. And what particularly for this particular president. This president does not want anybody to think that this operation was anything other than a complete and total success. He doesn't want to look at intelligence that might say the contrary, in part because I think he wants to declare it over and move on. He's got other things on his mind. He's got other things on his priority list. He doesn't really feel all that excited about getting into a Middle East war. Remember how much he was taking heat from his Maga base about the possibility of an extended military operation there. He'd like to be able to say, look, the intelligence says it's all over. We don't need to do anything else. One and done, and we're out of here. Any intelligence to the contrary works against that narrative. So he's blaming the reporters for what the intelligence agencies are reporting to him.
John, what makes no sense to me is what the president seems to be doing is harping on this one point, almost like he's unwilling to say what most experts are saying, that we do not know exactly how much damage was done, and we won't for some time. Two things can be true. The Iran strikes were a success, and it'll take time to figure out exactly how much of a success. He won't seem to operate in this universe of fact.
You stole my line, the two things that could be true. I mean, that's obviously what's going on here, Steph. I mean, you've got a president who went out on Truth Social and said that the nuclear program had been completely obliterated, and then there's reporting from that Defense Intelligence Agency report that suggests that perhaps it didn't completely destroy everything, destroy the entire program. And then the lecture that the media get from the administration is that it takes much longer to figure out what the full assessment is than what the government's own report was, that was subsequent to Donald Trump saying it was completely obliterated. And I guess what I would say is Donald Trump is trying to sell something.
Right.
And, you know,
Don't
it's
tell the
not
truth.
necessarily exactly what he said. But obviously the military operation was a success. They went to hit those 3 sites. They hit them pretty hard. That is a success.
But they had
Whether or
moved.
not that means Iran is 6 months away, 3 months away, a year away, 10 years away from having an operable nuclear weapon, I think it will take some time to judge.
But John, isn't that the thing that makes no sense? He's stepping on his own win.
Yeah.
Yes. He is stepping on his own win, but I think for a lot of Americans, particularly the folks that listen to him on Truth Social,
That
or
mean
watch
it
him on
ain't
television,
true.
which is, I mean, we're talking about literally hundreds of millions of Americans through the various outlets. That's the story they're going to hear. And, you know, for some people, they will want to know what the actual truth is. And the truth may be that what he said is closer to right than wrong, but it will continue to sow doubt, create doubt, and you know, we'll eventually again have an actual answer. But Donald Trump has gotten out there first with the strong statement and continues to stick by it, no matter what evidence might be presented alternative to it.
And can't prove nothing.
Michael, what are you hearing from senators after today's
Just a
briefing?
habitual liar.
It was a real split screen, Stephanie. You heard from a number of Democrats, and to the points that have been made, saying that this was a successful attack. As John noted, there were 3 targets. They were hit significantly. But the question is how significantly, and that is still under the microscope. Senator Blumenthal had said that exactly, saying that if anyone says that they know how much these sites were impacted at this moment, they're lying, because the intelligence is still going through it. I think what Peter said is an interesting point, and what a lot of folks on Capitol Hill are thinking about. The reason why the extent of the damage that has been done has been so in the headlines and of conversation is because there are likely going to be a number of Republicans on Capitol Hill who want additional strikes on some of these sites if the entire nuclear program was not completely obliterated, as President Trump has said. That's certainly a concern that Democrats are having right now.
He stroked his ego too quick.
Final intelligence report, what the future will look like. And for President Trump, we saw him contemplate this decision of whether or not to strike these nuclear targets in Iran for quite some time. So perhaps he's fighting the narrative to try to hone in on the narrative that these were successful strikes to try to prevent another decision to have to be made. But certainly that's a conversation on Capitol Hill of, depending on what this intelligence analysis looks like, what does the future look like for U.S. intervention in Iran?
So Israel is also now saying the strikes were a huge success. And Peter, I want to dig into that, because Donald Trump is obviously motivated to tell us that the strikes were a huge success.
Because he done made a deal with them behind the
same
scenes.
Motivation, because there's a big chance that if the nuclear program is even remotely okay, Israel's going to want to strike again. So doesn't it support Donald Trump's argument that Israel is now in his camp saying, yeah, this thing really worked? Because if it wasn't, they'd want to attack again soon.
Right. The Israeli assessments do support Donald Trump's argument. Of course, Israeli intelligence is very good. We've seen that in the recent weeks of just how good they have been in terms of their ability to target some of these Iranian facilities and high-level personnel in their own military operations. So you have to take that.
Okay, so let's be clear. Let's just stop. They hit the right target. They hit the spots that they were supposed to hit. However, he was teasing, he was trolling, and they moved what it was supposed to be, was supposed to destroy, because he gave them the heads up. So did they hit the right spots? Yes. Did it destroy the weapons of mass destruction? No. No. So you can sit here and play on words, sir. It's like, okay, yeah, they said it, they hit the spot. They did hit the spot. They hit exactly where they were supposed to hit. But did it destroy the weapons of mass destruction? No. So you mimicking Bush. Yeah, that's
successful strikes to try to prevent another decision to have to be made. But certainly that's a conversation on Capitol Hill of, depending on what this intelligence analysis looks like, what does the future look like for U.S. intervention in Iran?
So Israel is also now saying the strikes were a huge success. And Peter, I want to get into that. Because Donald Trump is obviously motivated to tell us that the strikes were a huge success. But does Israel have that same motivation? Because there's a big chance that if the nuclear program is even remotely okay, Israel's going to want to strike again. So doesn't it support Donald Trump's argument that Israel is now in his camp saying, yeah, this thing really worked? Because if it wasn't, they'd want to attack again soon.
Right. The Israeli assessments do support Donald Trump's argument, of course. Israeli intelligence is very good. We've seen that in the recent weeks of just how good they have been in terms of their ability to target some of these Iranian facilities and high-level personnel in their own military operations. So you have to take that seriously. At the same time, they are, of course, motivated to back up the president politically because they want to keep the president in their camp. The fact that the president went ahead and ordered this operation was incredibly important to Israel because most assessments
so that means Israel will agree with what he said and lie.
The Fordo facility, which is buried underneath the mountain, only the United States has the power to do so. So keeping the president happy, keeping the president engaged, keeping the president feeling like he did something really good is important politically for Israel as well. But you're right. I mean,
So lie and stroke his ego. Because if not, he gonna whine like a baby and have a temper tantrum. So lie. Again, you have to be a liar to be a part of this cabinet. And allies. Because they done made some deal. That's why he was sitting there saying, Israel, do not drop those bombs. Do not do that. Yeah. Yeah. We get it. Big baby Huey will have a temper tantrum.
Most assessments say that the Israelis did not have the capacity to destroy or even damage the Fordo facility, which is buried underneath the mountain. Only the United States has the power to do so. So keeping the president happy, keeping the president engaged, keeping the president feeling like he did something really good is important politically for Israel as well. But you're right. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, this could be set back months. It could be set back years. Some people say, look, even setting back years is still not good enough, that we have to, of course, eliminate it permanently, and ultimately permanently would suggest a diplomatic solution if they can simply rebuild it over time. This is the question that a lot of people are going to be asking. What is Iran's calculation at this point? Is it worth it to them to try to continue to create a nuclear bomb, to race, in fact, for nuclear bomb, because they may take from this that the only defense they ever have is a nuclear capacity? Or do they say this is just too much of a cost, it's time to find a way to get out of this?
A lot going on.
So it was another chaotic day in Donald Trump's America, another chaotic one in which they decided to hold a White House press briefing. And since Caroline seems to be following the same attack the press strategy as Pete Hegseth, I figured I would take some questions. Rachel Scott, ABC News, kick it off.
Just to follow back up on the meeting that the president mentioned about wanting to have this meeting with the Iranians next week, clearly there's a willingness here from the administration to want to meet with Iranian officials. What is the holdup here in trying to schedule it? Are you experiencing any resistance from the Iranians?
I mean, first of all, Rachel, let's all hope there is even a tiny, tiny iota of truth behind Trump's claim that there are discussions underway about a meeting with the Iranians next week. We did just strike them 4 days ago. We have no idea if that is actually true. But if it is, that would be good news. Because even if the military strikes last week had destroyed the program, which it seems pretty clear they did not, can't foul knowledge or intention. That's what we were just talking about. And the Iranians still have the know-how to make a nuclear weapon. And after the last few weeks, I mean, they may also have increased intention. Who knows? Quick follow-up.
And just one more, just the goal of the meeting. The president mentioned yesterday that it may not be necessary to have an agreement with the Iranians. What is the purpose? What would be the goal of this meeting?
Look, if there is an iota of a possibility for talks that could lead to negotiations, of course the goal is a deal. You need a deal to return inspectors who can have visibility into what the capacity is of the existing facilities and how much enriched uranium they have. We don't know that right now. We won't know it for a while, or ever maybe. That was one of the benefits of the nuclear deal that Trump ripped up. This isn't about trusting the Iranians. It's about having the ability to verify what they're actually doing. You need a deal to do that. Okay, Carolina, the meta, go ahead.
In January, President Trump revoked security details for several former administrations, including Mike Pompeo, Mark Milley, and John Bolton. Given the heightened tensions with Iran right now, is he considering restoring those security details?
That's an easy one, Carolina. Nope, not at all. Okay, Aisha Hasni, Fox News, go ahead.
How
Wow.
confident are you that you'll find this leaker?
I mean, first of all, Aisha, the story about the leaker and finding the leaker is exactly what Trump and Hegseth want you to be asking about in the White House briefing, which is maybe why you were asking about it. That aside, I don't think either of them have shown any care whatsoever to date about the proper handling of classified information. Do you? Trump was hit with 40 felony counts for his mishandling of classified documents. Pete Hegseth was texting war plans on Signal a few months ago. I don't think their search comes from a genuine concern about respecting classified information. That answers your question. All right, let's do one more. Brian Schwartz from the Wall Street Journal.
One big beautiful bill. There's conversations on the Hill right now about the Medicaid cuts. I'm curious if the final bill that the president's been talking about comes to him and it has Medicaid cuts in it, will he sign it, or would he rather just Congress do away with those cuts?
Of course he will sign it, Brian. He just won't call it cuts. No Republican will. They will say they are necessary reforms. But no amount of spin changes the fact that the current bill would knock 16 million people off of health care, including 8.6 million on Medicaid, because of cuts. That's what they are, and no requirements. The only tiny
So this is his replacement years later of the Obamacare.
Bill for now, including some of the health care.
Cut it out.
Republicans
Cut out
desperately want.
healthcare. Got it. Oh, what is this one? Boy, I gotta stay up late on to keep my eye on you, don't I? Oh, Donnie boy, I gotta stay up late, don't I? Hold on. Oh, let's meet the press. Let's go.
President Trump is set to speak any moment now at the White House as the administration ramps up its pressure campaign to get the president's legislative agenda across the finish line, despite major hurdles in the Senate and holdouts in the House. And the Supreme Court sides with South Carolina in the state's effort to block Planned Parenthood from receiving any Medicaid funding ahead of a major ruling tomorrow on birthright citizenship and the power of the judicial branch. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Yamisha Sendor in Washington, where top officials from the Pentagon, the State Department, and the CIA just briefed senators behind closed doors on the U.S.'s recent strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. The classified briefing is the latest move in the president's full court press, promoting the strike's effectiveness and pushing back against concerns about the future of Iran's nuclear ambitions.
To me, it still appears that we have only set back the Iranian nuclear program by a handful of months. Allegations that we have obliterated their program just don't seem to stand up to reason. I'd walk away from that briefing still under the belief that we have not obliterated the program. The president was deliberately misleading the public when he said the program was obliterated.
Operation Midnight Hammer was brilliant, it was bold, it was necessary, and it was effective. They blew these places up in a major league way.
Nice.
Major league setback, years, not months.
Nice.
The classified briefing comes after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, spoke publicly this morning, giving new details of the planning and execution of the strikes. And the leaders also showcased video demonstrations of the destructive power of the bunker-busting bombs that were used in the mission.
here's what we know following the attacks and the strikes on Fordo. First, that the weapons were built, tested, and loaded properly. 2, the weapons were released on speed and on parameters. 3, the weapons all guided to their intended targets and to their intended aim points. 4, the weapons functioned as designed, meaning they exploded. We know this through other means, intelligence means that we have.
He real careful.
Visibly, we were visibly able to see them. And we know that the trailing jets saw the first weapons function, and the pilots stated, quote, "This was the brightest explosion that I've ever seen. It literally looked like daylight."
There were no new details about the intelligence assessment in that briefing, but Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth took time to publicly scold and target the press after a preliminary intelligence assessment was leaked. That report raised the possibility that Iran's nuclear program had been set back 3 to 6 months by the strikes. The CIA director and the director of national intelligence now say newer intelligence indicates the program has been severely damaged and would take years to rebuild. But in reaction to the leak, the White House says it now plans to limit how much intelligence it shares with Congress, according to a senior Trump administration official. House Speaker Mike Johnson telling reporters he believes that leak came from lawmakers.
You already limiting what you tell Congress.
Intelligence information from Congress. No, we're working through all that.
You didn't tell them you was bombing. You didn't get approval.
It's dangerous and ridiculous that that happened, but we're going to solve that problem, and we'll keep the coordination. Do you think the leak came from Congress, sir?
It came from Trump.
Appears to be skeptical of last weekend's operation. According to a new NBC News poll powered by SurveyMonkey, 45% say they oppose the strikes on Iran. 38% support them. Although there are very sharp partisan divisions in these numbers. Joining me now, NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill. Also with us, NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who's outside the White House, and NBC News intelligence reporter Dan DeLuce. So thank you all for being here. Sahil, I want to start with you. What's been the reaction of senators to today's briefing on this strike against Iran?
Hey, Yamish. Well, I've just been outside that briefing for the last hour or so, speaking to senators as they came out. And there's been a mix of reactions. Let's start with where they agree. There's been widespread praise of the U.S. intelligence officials who carried out the strike, their ability, their dedication, carrying out the task that they were assigned to do. Then on President Trump's claim that Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated. You played a little bit of this, but there were real divisions here in terms of how the two parties talked about it. Senator Lindsey Graham backed up Trump's claim that they had been obliterated, but even he said that Iran could build it right back. And he told me when I asked him that U.S. military strikes do need to be on the table if Iran tries to build this back in the coming months. The Democrats said they were not nearly convinced in the president's claim that Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated, that if anything, it had only been temporarily set back. Senator Chris Murphy had a line saying you can't bomb away knowledge, that there has to be a strategy, there has to be diplomacy, which he has not seen yet. And Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, said he asked this question as well. He didn't receive an adequate answer when he asked for evidence as to the president's claim about it being obliterated. He said he sees no coherent strategy, no end game, no plan, no specifics in terms of how to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, Yamish. So there's a lot of questions that senators still had coming out of that.
Well, there are also a lot of questions, not just about sort of the briefing itself, but also who was included. DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, who, of course, the director of national intelligence, she wasn't among the briefers today, Sahil. So I want to know, what more do we know about why she wasn't there, especially as we had reporting that she was kind of getting the cold shoulder here from the Trump administration?
Yeah, a limited amount that we know, Yamish, given that even senators were coming out of there wondering why Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, who certainly seems pertinent to an operation, to information like this, was not there. Senator Murphy said it's a real question as to why she's not in these briefings, but Senator Lindsey Graham did say when that issue came up that it's very clear that the president trusts CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and that he, in Lindsey Graham's view, is one of the big winners in all this.
Yeah, some other news, of course, that's really important today is that the White House is saying it's going to limit the information, the intelligence that it shares with lawmakers. I wonder, how do Republicans feel about that on Hill?
Yeah, we know that Democrats have been critical in the early onset of this of this news, but I haven't seen a lot of Republican reaction about this. Yamiche, what it would do is it would set a pretty bold precedent going forward that intelligence is limited to members of one party. That's never how things have operated in the Senate. It's never how things have operated in the House. And, this is one of the situations where everyone realizes what goes around comes around. So I suspect we'll be hearing more about this.
Yeah, we'll definitely be looking for more on that. And House Speaker Mike Johnson told our colleague Ryan Nobles that he suspects the preliminary assessment of this was leaked by Congress. Do we know where he's getting that suspicion?
We don't, but he did use the word suspicion. I wrote it down here. He said, "That's my suspicion," when asked why he's saying that. Now, knowing Speaker Johnson, he likes to align with President Trump. He's pretty studious about doing that, doesn't like to have any daylight between himself and the White House. So if I were to wage an educated guess, because we don't know, that's where it's coming from.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sahil, for all that reporting on the Hill. Vaughn, I want to come to you next. If the White House is trying to convince members of Congress that the strikes were as effective as the president claims, why is it limiting intelligence that it's going to now share with lawmakers?
Right. It only increases the skepticism that
he don't want to be held accountable.
Have spoken publicly about. You're looking at the
he does not want to be held accountable.
Saturday night. The initial briefing was supposed to take place on Tuesday. Because of the return of Secretaries Hegseth and Rubio from overseas, it got pushed back here to Thursday, 5 days later, which was met by a lot of pushback and frustration from Democrats. And now this news that the White House intends to cut off the intelligence that it shares directly with members of Congress. And we should note that the Gang of Eight, which is the top leadership, Republicans and Democrats, not only of the House and Senate conferences and caucuses, but also of the intelligence committees. Not everybody was informed ahead of these airstrikes that they were going to be taking place and the exact objectives of them. And so this latest news that the White House could seek to potentially cut off further intelligence out of fear that it is being disseminated to the public only undergirds the questions here in Washington, D.C. about these two branches of government working in conjunction in order to carry out military attacks overseas. Of course, there's been a lot of pushback, too, about not getting prior authorization by Congress, something that presidential administrations have now, for the better part of 20 years, not sought to go forward with.
Yeah. There's also this issue of the Trump administration saying that it's actually too early to assess the U.S. strikes and how much they set
he should have kept his mouth closed.
Nuclear program, if it's just by a few months or maybe a few years. But the other thing is that President Trump is maintaining that Iran's nuclear facilities were obliterated. And in my conversation with the president, he told me that he felt like he had essentially almost solved the problems of this. He said that he didn't believe that these two powers were going to be shooting back at each other, that being, of course, Israel and Iran. And he also sounded very confident that going forward, he had really achieved what he set out to achieve when I was talking to him. So I wonder, though, do you think the White House is trying to have it both ways here?
You're absolutely right. From your conversation with him 5 days ago to now, he has one very clear message, and one message that he wants his White House to send out to the masses across the world, and that was that their nuclear program was obliterated. Just in the last hour, the White House pushing out this email to reporters that said experts agree with the White House that it was, in fact, quote, obliterated. But this is where you have seen the president really try to pit the American media against the U.S. military in this for the conveying the leak of the Defense Intelligence Agency's initial assessment that potentially the nuclear sites were not as damaged to the extent that the president had suggested, that instead that it was pushed back potentially by just a couple months. That is where the president has suggested that the U.S. Media is effectively discounting the work of U.S. servicemen and women that went and carried out these operations, which by all accounts were successful and ultimately were carried out and executed in the way that they were intended. But that is different than the question of whether the nuclear sites were fully destroyed or not, or where those stockpiles of highly enriched uranium are, which this White House has still been unclear, besides Caroline Leavitt saying that they believe that they were a part of what was destroyed inside of particularly the Fordo nuclear site, despite European officials suggesting their intelligence says otherwise.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Vaughn, for reporting outside the White House. And Dan, I want to come to you. Of course, it was quite the briefing today at the Pentagon. One of the things, there were a lot of things that happened that were interesting, but the Joint Chiefs of Staff also showed this video demonstration of these bombs and what they can do. What did that tell us about sort of this strike, and how does that connect to President Trump's claims that this was totally destroyed?
You know, I don't know how edifying that video really is. It is interesting to see. This is never before seen footage of this huge bomb, this 30,000 pound weapon being used. And it's impressive, but it doesn't tell us, again, what is the state of Iran's nuclear program.
Exactly.
But what it was interesting today, General Kane at the briefing did say they hit the targets that they wanted to hit, and that included these ventilation shafts in that deeply buried site at Fordow. And the Iranians had tried to cover those up with concrete caps. They believe they hit those, and then that allowed other weapons to then penetrate very deep underground. So there are many indications from the military and from the intelligence agencies that they think they did significant damage to these sites. But then there's a separate question, which you raised, which is, what is the state of Iran's nuclear program?
Right.
Because there is a distinct possibility that they have uranium, enriched uranium, and centrifuges and other important hardware that was not at those sites. And so they still may have the ability to revive this program. And that is not really answerable at this point. And we're just going to have to see.
Yeah. Well, as we talk about questions that might not be answerable, I'll ask you another one, which is the CIA director as well as the director of national intelligence. They both claimed that they can back up the president's claim that everything was obliterated, everything was totally destroyed. Have we seen actual evidence to back up those assertions?
No. There is no press freedom in Iran, as you know, and the U.S. intelligence agencies don't declassify material very easily and very quickly when they do. It's only been days since the strike. So, this is their account. We do know that the UN Atomic Energy Agency is saying, for its part, that they also believe there was significant damage done to these sites, that, centrifuges may not have survived at these sites. So
did it destroy the weapons of mass destruction? No.
Western camera crews going around there showing us what it looks like.
I also want to ask you, did we get any more clarity on whether this enriched uranium that's critical in some ways to Iran's nuclear program, that was moved before the strikes? Did we get any more detail on whether or not that actually happened?
That came up at the briefing, and there was not really a straight answer.
Right.
The defense secretary suggested or implied that everything was there and that they destroyed it, but he was ambiguous and kind of deferred to the intelligence community. So that is still very much an open question.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of other questions.
We want to know how they know.
Thank you so much, Ann, for joining us. And now I'm joined by Democratic Congressman
to know,
Smith.
then how do you know?
The ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. Thank you so much, Congressman, for being here. So what do you need to hear in tomorrow's briefing to convince you that the president's claims that last weekend's strikes were as impactful as he's saying they are?
Well, I think the most important thing here is, in all likelihood, Iran still has a nuclear program. Now, we can argue competing intelligence assessments, basically educated guesses on what would have happened. But the odds that all 19,000 centrifuges that Iran had before Israel started attacking them, and all, I forget the exact number, it's some 400 plus kilograms of near weapons grade enriched plutonium is all gone now, that's pretty close to zero. I mean, they probably still have some in some centrifuges, so they still have an active nuclear program. So what are we going to do about it? And then in terms of what happened at Fordow, we don't know is the honest answer. And I have seen estimates before this that doubted whether or not these bunker buster bombs could get all the way down and hit those centrifuges and destroy them. So we don't know. None of which is to say, by the way, the military that carried out this mission carried it out brilliantly and flawlessly. They did exactly what they were supposed to do, but there is reason to doubt that it completely destroyed Iran's nuclear program.
Right.
And if in fact Iran does still have a nuclear program, which they almost certainly do, then we still have a problem that we need to deal with.
And as you're thinking about the fact that there might still be this problem, I wonder, did Secretary Hegseth or Chairman Kane make a compelling case to you that these strikes did create major damage, especially when we think of Fordow?
I think it probably created some significant damage, but again, major, obliterated. There's a whole bunch of words that don't actually mean anything. It's really simple. They had 19,000 centrifuges before. How many do they have now? They have 400 kilograms plus of 60+% weaponized uranium or enriched uranium. Sorry, how much do they have now? If they can't answer those questions, and they can't, that we really don't know. And then it's just a matter of sort of performance to say whatever word you're going to say that makes people think it's destroyed. So we don't have that evidence. And also, Secretary Hegseth being so partisan and so political and attacking the media so aggressively, it calls into question his objectivity. I mean, even if he knew for a fact that this mission had not been as successful as advertised, do we really think he'd tell us the truth?
No.
I don't.
Well, I want to ask you a hypothetical here, lawmaker, if I can, Congressman, if I can, which is these strikes, if they did set back Iran's nuclear program, even for a few months, given the fact that they might still have the technology to do this, but even if it's just for a few months, do you still consider that a success?
Well, success is a weird word. I would say this. I would personally believe that it was the wrong decision to drop those bombs. That the risk that was taken in dropping those bombs far outweighed the benefit of buying a little bit of time in the weapons program. And it's even worse.
And because you did it the wrong way, all eyes are on you, and things are, all these bad things are happening, not getting passed or blocked, because everybody is looking at you with a side eye because you bypassed them. Now you want them to help you. Boy, sit down. Sit down. Go comb your hair and tan all your face instead of your forehead.
Spinning that the program is gone when it's not. So now we're at Fordo. We don't know is the honest answer. And I have seen estimates before this that doubted whether or not these bunker buster bombs could get all the way down and hit those centrifuges and destroy them. So we don't know. None of which is to say, by the way, the military that carried out this mission carried it out brilliantly and flawlessly. They did exactly what they were supposed to do, but there is reason to doubt that it completely destroyed Iran's nuclear program. And if, in fact, Iran does still have a nuclear program, which they almost certainly do, then we still have a problem that we need to deal with.
And if you're thinking about the fact that there might still be this problem, I wonder, did Secretary Hegseth or Chairman Kaine make a compelling case to you that these strikes did create major damage, especially when we think of Fordo?
I think it probably created some significant damage, but again, major, obliterated. There's a whole bunch of words that don't actually mean anything. It's really simple. They had 19,000 centrifuges before. How many do they have now? They had 400 kilograms plus of 60+% weaponized uranium or enriched uranium. Sorry, how much do they have now? If they can't answer those questions, and they can't, then we really don't know. And then it's just a matter of sort of performance to say whatever word you're going to say that makes people think it's destroyed. So we don't have that evidence. And also, Secretary Hegseth being so partisan and so political and attacking the media so aggressively, it calls into question his objectivity. I mean, even if he knew for a fact that this mission had not been as successful as advertised, do we really think he'd tell us the truth? I don't.
Well, I want to ask you a hypothetical here, lawmaker, if I can, Congressman, if I can, which is these strikes, if they did set back Iran's nuclear program, even for a few months, given the fact that they might still have the technology to do this, but even if it's just for a few months, do you still consider that a success?
Well,
no.
Success is a weird word.
I
would personally believe that it was the wrong decision to drop those bombs.
Okay.
That the risk that was taken in dropping those bombs far outweighed the benefit of buying a little bit of time in the weapons program. And it's even worse if, in fact, the Secretary of Defense and the President are spinning that the program is gone when it's not. So now we're not even in a position to deal with reality. So I think the risk still outweighed the reward. And look, I've been briefed on this issue for better than a decade now, and there was always considerable doubt that no matter how flawlessly the mission was carried out, no matter how well our service members carried out the mission, which they did, that we just might not be technically capable of completely destroying Iran's nuclear weapons program. And then we kind of started a war with Iran by bombing them.
Right.
Iran, unlike Libya and some of the other places that we've attacked without congressional approval, Iran's got the power to shoot back. And that's not necessarily over yet either.
Yeah, well, in talking about Iran's power. I want to get your reaction to a few tweets from your colleague, Congressman Jim Himes, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. First, on Iran's ability to build a nuclear bomb, he wrote, "The only question that matters is whether the Iranian regime has the stuff necessary to build a bomb and how fast." Do you agree with that assessment, the way that he's put that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly different way of saying what I said about how many centrifuges they have and how much highly enriched uranium they have. But yes, that is.
Let's bring in our friend, Fox News Chief Political Analyst Britt Hume. So good to see you. In all your years of covering Washington, D.C., the Pentagon is one that does briefings quite regularly, but this was a little unusual. Wanted to get your take on how you thought they did this morning.
Well, I was very impressed, especially with General Kane, whose description of how as Jennifer has just outlined, of how the targeters in the Pentagon going back, 15 years, had planned for this moment. The B-2 had been built for this moment, and the bunker buster bombs had been too for this very moment. And I think it's fair to say that the problem with that early report that leaked out of the Defense Intelligence Agency was that it wasn't really plausible that ordnance of this capacity that had been tested to the extent it could be by the U.S. military, and that, so far as we could tell, struck the target precisely, would have done only limited damage. It was obviously a preliminary report, and as Jennifer pointed out in her reporting when it first came out, it was low confidence, and it seems to have deserved low confidence based on all that we've heard since. Obviously, final reports are yet to be heard, but it was an impressive briefing, especially by General Kane. I'd like to say a word, if I may, Dana, about Jennifer Griffin, who was attacked by the Defense Secretary today, an attack she certainly, in my view, did not deserve. Her professionalism, her knowledge, and her experience at the Pentagon is unmatched, and I have had and still have the greatest regard for her. The attack on her was unfair.
One thing I was going to mention about that, Bill, Britt, is that the DIA is kind of like on the first level of intel. It gets higher up as you go to the CIA and DNI. And it reminded me of the 2004 exit polls, right? These first reports can often be wrong, and that's what they were trying to correct today. Bill.
And Britt, I was just going to ask you.
Well, it was a typical.
Go ahead, Britt.
Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry.
No, please go.
No, I was just going to say that it is typical of the media in our age that any negative report that you can get your hands on in the aftermath of the United States military action is going to be highlighted, played up, and so on, despite the fact that it was early, based on very little and low confidence. And it's disappointing that happens. It continues to happen, but it does.
Yeah, Britt, you can tell the administration is just really irritated about those initial leaks and how they were portrayed in the leaks to the media. The president last night, when he was announcing this press conference, teased it as offering irrefutable proof that these strikes were a success. Do you think they achieved that with this press conference this morning?
Well, I think they probably helped, particularly General Kane's comments. And look, there's now a body of response that we've seen to this initial report, and we're hearing it from all kinds of quarters, as has been outlined by Jennifer and others, to the effect that the likelihood that this was a very great success is the real deal. So obviously we await final reports. First reports are inevitably unreliable and should be so treated. But I think they made some strides today toward straightening out what I think was some misleading reporting.
The administration really is focusing on whoever the leaker was. It was classified information. It was leaked to the media. That is not allowed. Todd Blanche was on with Laura last night. Watch.
Is the DOJ prepared to charge whoever is responsible, and what could those charges look like?
I mean, absolutely. Of course we're ready. But you better believe, and the American people better know for sure, that this is exactly the type of conduct that we will investigate fully. Whether it's treasonous or whether someone will be charged with treason, listen, we'll work that out, but you better believe that the Department of Justice is going to do everything we can to find out who did this.
A lot of these leak investigations don't ever ultimately result in something. Is this one possibly different?
Yeah, well, as you suggest, there's a long history of leak investigations and an even longer history of leaks, and most of them come to nothing.
Leakers know what they're doing, and they do it because leaking is a way to try to exercise power and influence the national discussion. And most of the time, they don't find out who leaked them. You know, we still don't know who leaked that Supreme Court opinion in the Dobbs case. We still don't know who left the cocaine in the White House. And the list of these things goes on.
Who left the what?
I hope they find the leaker. It was not inappropriate to leak, but I wouldn't hold my breath.
Britt, I watched some of your posts on social media. You've got, some concerns about some of the reporters that initially picked up the leak, or the pieces of the leak that came out initially.
Please hit the like button. Double tap your screen.
The main thing, look,
I greatly appreciate it.
Reporting the existence of this early report from the Defense Intelligence Agency. What I object to is it being played up as if it were some final judgment, and and particularly a report on CNN left out the fact that this was held in low confidence. That's important. That's a critical detail. I know Jennifer reported when she reported on this, but certain others didn't, especially that CNN report, done by a reporter, by the way, who fell hook, line, and sinker for the Steele dossier, which is now totally discredited, and also bought into the idea that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. So someone who should be regarded, I think, with skepticism.
Low confidence, sort of like America's feelings about the media. All right, Britt Hume, thank you so much. It's great to see you today.
That's Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb, Army veteran, Black Hawk helicopter pilot, and international military strategist in Focus Now. We heard incredible detail, and I want to get into that now because Americans likely won't see this anywhere else unless they watch this morning. And I'm disappointed that we hadn't kept our focus on the fine men and women of the military, but we did it today. So if you'll give me just a moment, I want people to see this from the Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Dan Kane.
For more than 15 years, this officer and his teammate lived and breathed this single target, Fordo, a critical element of Iran's covert nuclear weapons program. They literally dreamed about this target at night when they slept. They thought about it driving back and forth to work, and they knew from the very first days what this was for. And then, on a day in June of 2025, more than 15 years after they started their life's work, the phone rang and the President of the United States ordered the B-2 force that you've supported to go strike and kill this target.
Heroes in motion. We're thankful to all of them. First of all, your thoughts on that, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah, good morning, Harris. It's always impressive to be able to see what the American military can do. The debate over whether or not we should, that resides in the hands of the politicians. Let them answer those questions. But when it comes down to executing the mission with expertise, we have shown on more than one occasion, and this is just another one, that we can fly around the world, target you very quickly, very surgically, and return home. Nobody else can do that. And that's what the American taxpayer can see in the expertise in the American military, and everybody around the world, I guarantee you, heard those explosions one way or another, and they're thinking twice about some of the things they may have heard about the U.S. military. And I hope they are, because our goal is to make sure that we're never needed in the first place.
That's exactly right, and that's what President Trump was saying. He wanted this to go in, be a precision strike, and then everybody made it back, and they did. It was remarkable and a blessing. Look, what is important for Americans to know at this point? You've got a low confidence, leaked assessment early on before much was known at all. We're still waiting for the actual assessment that will count, if you will, with more people on the ground, scientists, et cetera. What do you think the American public should know at this point about the effectiveness of what our military just pulled off?
Well, first of all, Harris, I would say be patient. One of the truisms in the military is that the first report is always wrong. And unfortunately, in this case, that first report came with someone with an agenda behind them to try to show that this didn't work. So that patience means the American people should wait for an actual complete assessment. You can't assess this from airborne and space-based platforms purely. It has to have a human intelligence component to it with some eyes on or better evaluation of what is happening. That's not done yet. It needs to be done, and I'm sure it will be done fairly quickly. But initial reports that close to the activity, You can never rely on them. And so it's worth being patient and to know when the truth comes out, it will come out. And this was a precision strike by a massive ordnance penetrator. These bombs don't miss. And when they hit, there is a significant response with what they're capable of doing. I'm familiar enough with them to know what they're capable of. Whatever they hit, they were effective. It's just a question of how effective were they and how long would it take for Iran to try to rebuild. I think we're at the point of them taking years to have to rebuild with their capabilities if ever.
That part of what you just said about the rebuild for years from now, is what we've heard from the director of the IAEA, and also from Iran saying it was heavily damaged. And we know the president and we know Israel have both said it. So, I mean, we have to have patience for the details on this, but what do you make of, that's more than a triangle of sources right there.
It is, and I think what you're getting to is a high confidence assessment that's going to happen very quickly, because the American people rightfully are demanding answers that they are owed. And that's, of course, outside of the classified arena that will come in different ways, that Congress will also have to answer those questions, have those questions asked as well. And all that is to follow. We do have time. At this point, there's no emergency, there's no rush to form conclusions that are based on limited intelligence or lack of knowledge. That's why I believe that the American people do need to have patience, but I do believe this administration will provide some answers very quickly.
Yeah, and the American people deserve the truth, and not some politically or otherwise driven, slow drip of misfacts, misinformation, and perhaps an agenda, as you pointed to. So there is an FBI criminal investigation looking into who might have leaked this information. Let's move on, though, for what I've been promising so far this hour, and that is a lot more detail on that mission, which came via, at one point, Chairman Kaine, who also highlighted the young soldiers who were tasked with defending the largest U.S. base in the Middle East when Iran retaliated. Let's watch.
The oldest soldier was a 28-year-old captain. The youngest was a 21-year-old private who'd been in the military for less than 2 years. Imagine you're that young first lieutenant, you're 25 or 26 years old, and you've been assigned as the tactical director inside the command and control element. You, at that age, are the sole person responsible to defend this base. As the targets were detected, round after round of Patriot missiles are ejected from their canisters by an initial launch charge. Then the main solid rocket motor ignites. You can feel this in your body if you've ever been around a Patriot taking a shot. And round after round goes out and guides against those missiles coming inbound. We believe that this is the largest single Patriot engagement in U.S. military history. These awesome humans, along with their Qatari brothers and sisters in arms, stood between a salvo of Iranian missiles and the safety of Al-Udeid. They are the unsung heroes of the 21st century United States Army.
Sir, you have served. You get the last word.
These are the kind of people that America grows. And it doesn't matter.
The prosecution delivered their
when they're very young. They are capable of doing great deeds, and they'll continue to do so. America's lieutenants are non-commissioned officers without whom we would cease to function as a military, are the ones who are capable of these great deeds, and they will continue to do so. This is what makes America's military great. It's not grand statements from podiums by generals, and I love General Kaine, by the way. It's soldiers on the ground, sailors, airmen, Marines, who take the initiative to do what is right when the time is right, no matter what is going on in the halls of D.C. All they know is they have to do the best job they can. This is what they do, and they'll continue to do so.
Amen. Colonel Dobb, thank you.
Thank you, Harris.
We're going to send it down to Alexandria Hoff live at the White House. Alex, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Bill. Yeah, this briefing that we had just seen, this was the Pentagon's moment to tell the story of this mission, explain what the weapons used are capable of, and in doing so, counter reports that had drawn into question the effectiveness of this mission. General Kaine explained a little bit more about how all of this went down and the intricacies of Operation Midnight Hammer. Listen.
the primary kill mechanism in the mission space was a mix of overpressure and blast ripping through the open tunnels and destroying critical hardware. The majority of the damage we assessed based on our extensive modeling was a blast layer combined with the impulse extending from the shock. Imagine what this looks like 6 times over.
So he says everything worked as planned. All of these weapons performed as they were expected to on an operation that really was 15 years in the making, because as General Kane explained, there had been somebody, 2 individuals actually in the intelligence community watching Fordo specifically as a site suspected of nuclear enrichment this entire time, and looking what kind of weapon would be needed to destroy this. It was explained to us that, and to all press that were there, that an attack on a mountainside covered nuclear site really would require the kind of weaponry that would first blast open the cap that they have. That is what happened. The rest went down into the ground, 1,000 feet per second, I believe the general said, exploding in that mission space where really the hub of Iran's nuclear capabilities. Weapon number 6 then was their cover, just in case one of those jets or weapons did not work. General Kane saying today it's really not his job to assess the aftermath, but he knows everything worked as it should.
The Joint Force does not do BDA. By design, we don't grade our own homework. The intelligence community does. But here's what we know following the attacks and the strikes on Fordo. First, that the weapons were built, tested, and loaded properly. 2, the weapons were released on speed and on parameters. 3, the weapons all guided to their intended targets and to their intended aim points. 4, the weapons functioned as designed, meaning they exploded.
All right, so something the White House is now looking into is the way that they share information with members of Congress. There's clearly an indication there that they feel like that some of this leaked initial assessment might have come from that direction. The White House, also, officials in law enforcement, federal law enforcement, are looking into potential charges for whoever this leak is found to have been. This was early information, they said, and that reporting, the administration feels kind of lacked the full scope of that anyway. They found that to be reckless and an insult to the pilots and all of those who bravely contributed to Operation Midnight Hammer. Jennifer Griffin did ask an important question during this briefing today. She asked about certain imagery that was captured that showed Iranian trucks, I think she said, that had been seen on site one day, gone the next. That kind of contributes to this idea that Iran might have been moving their enriched uranium in the days prior to this attack. Secretary Hegseth, when asked about that, said that they are still looking at understanding where all the pieces were at what time. Guys.
All right, Alex Hoff with a great wrap-up of what we just saw this morning. Alex, thank you.
We are awaiting new comment from the White House regarding the leak of a low-confidence preliminary report on last weekend's strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. In just under an hour from now, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt will be holding a press briefing, no doubt answering questions about the newly launched investigation into the source of that leak report, as well as the media's narrative that the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities were not as successful as the administration claimed. So they are irresponsibly using that document with low confidence, even though more information is still coming out. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner here with my co-host Emily Compagno. Also joining us today, Laura Trump, host of My View with Laura Trump, Leslie Marshall, Fox News contributor, and Guy Benson, Fox News contributor and host of The Guy Benson Show on Fox News Radio. Earlier today, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth set the record straight, refuting a leaked Pentagon report which claimed United States strikes had limited impact on Iran's nuclear program, all while touting the success of Operation Midnight Hammer.
It says in the report, multiple linchpin assumptions are what this assessment. A linchpin assumption, you know what that is? That means your entire premise is predicated on a linchpin. If you're wrong, everything else is wrong. Here's the head of the UN Atomic Energy Agency this morning, Rafael Grossi. U.S. and Israeli strikes caused enormous damage to Iran's nuclear sites. Don't take my word for it. How about the IDF's chief of staff? I can say here that the assessment is that we significantly damaged the nuclear program, setting it back by years. John Ratcliffe, the director of the CIA, putting out a statement just last night, CIA can confirm that a body of credible intelligence indicates Iran's nuclear program has been severely damaged by recent targeted strikes. How about DNI Tulsi Gabbard yesterday? She writes, and I quote, "New intelligence confirms what POTUS has stated numerous times. Iran's nuclear facilities have been destroyed." Those that understand, those that see, those that do proper assessments recognize that what the United States military did was historic.
President Trump taking no issue with Secretary Hegseth's press briefing. He wrote this on Truth Social, "One of the greatest, most professional, and most confirming news conferences I have ever seen." Exclamation point. The White House now wants to limit classified information shared with Congress, a sign of where it thinks the preliminary assessment leak came from. And the president's deputy attorney general says the leaker will be charged to the fullest extent of the law.
I mean, absolutely. Of course we're ready. You better believe, and the American people better know for sure, that this is exactly the type of conduct that we will investigate fully. Whether it's treasonous and whether someone will be charged with treason, listen, we'll work that out, but you better believe that the Department of Justice is going to do everything we can to find out who did this.
Guy, this isn't about whether or not the report was put out there. It's how it was put out there. It's the fact that the journalists didn't question any of that, who put that out there in legacy media, and made it appear as if that was the one that we had all been waiting for, although it's labeled low confidence. I don't know about you, but I don't even take baby aspirin with low confidence. I mean, come on, if it says that on the label, you're looking for the real stuff.
I would think that within journalism circles, if you got this leak, you'd have to at least do a little check in your mind about
just kind of the...
You're like, okay, I'm a curious person. The Israelis have had air superiority over Iran for the better part of 2 weeks, bombing whatever they feel like, at will, basically. The United States comes in with this extraordinary, unique technology with bullseye hits. Oh, and by the way, the Israelis took out the brains behind the nuclear program, all those scientists, and yet that only set the program back by a few months. It doesn't make any sense just to a non-expert, outside observer like myself or like your typical journalist. I think what Secretary Hegseth did there was really smart. He said, don't take my word for it. Let me go through all the different intelligence agencies that have come to a different conclusion, including the IAEA, which isn't intelligence, but this is their bread and butter. This is what they do. The Israelis clearly have extraordinary intelligence penetration into Iran. They'd come to the same conclusion as we have.
The prosecution delivered their...
Focus on this one report with low confidence doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Emily.
And I want to focus for a moment on the nexus between the legacy media's amplification of a low confidence report in stark contrast to under the prior administration when they would rely heavily on the actual sources. So here's a couple of examples. And the point too is that the Biden administration botched it. So number one, remember that the Biden administration relied heavily on the intelligence community's assessments of how long the Taliban would be able to stay in power, right?
Yep.
That turned out to be totally different, but the press ran with it at the time. And what about the Chinese spy balloon, right? Then President Biden told us many times it's upon
why y'all just can't do y'all job instead of comparing yourself to what somebody else did prior? If y'all think that when he left office, he didn't leave a mess, y'all crazy. But you can't do your job without comparing yourself to what somebody else did previously. That means that you are not doing a competent job. You're finding a reason to push blame. So, well, you should be happy with what we're doing because it was better than what was being done before.
Everyone is saying it was
Oh
successful.
my God.
But one lone small voice that happened to leak it to another legacy figure, and that's what they amplify. It just shows the rot still exists and that it is purely political.
So this is just a cabinet of sarcasm, not productivity.
It does fit that narrative. That is
sarcasm.
Yeah, well, that is exactly right. And I think that trying to spin a narrative out of this is very concerning. You know, before we're Republicans or Democrats, we're all Americans, right? That's what we should all remember in this moment. This was a monumental, historic achievement. This is something to go in and take out these nuclear sites that presidents before Donald Trump said they all wanted to do, he was able to get it done. This is a low confidence report, and the fact that you had the legacy media pouncing on it, that it seemed like they were attempting to weaken America and our footing on the world stage at such an important time like this. You know, you want America to lead from a place of strength. You want us to be able to say, here, we're going to lay it all out for you on the table. Here's every single report. As the people
They can't give a report. Oh my God, I was sleeping, heard this, and woke up. They can't provide nothing.
Whenever we are on the precipice of Middle East peace, you want us in a strong state. And it felt like, I think to a lot of us out there, that the goal of this was the media to attack Donald Trump, as they always do, and anything he does. If he says up, they say down. We know how it always goes, and that's very disappointing.
You know what I'm thinking as you're talking? Whose side are they on?
Well, that's right.
Like, is it the American public in doing their job and getting the information right? I mean, I had news directors tell me, it's great to be first, it's most important to be right. Anyway, I want to get to this before I come to you, Leslie. General Kane, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff this morning, talked about the Americans who defended the American air base in Qatar during Iran's retaliation. Let's watch that.
The oldest soldier was a 28-year-old captain. The youngest was a 21-year-old private who'd been in the military for less than 2 years. So let's put ourselves out there for a second. Imagine you're that young first lieutenant, you're 25 or 26 years old, and you've been assigned as the tactical director inside the command and control element. You, at that age, are the sole person responsible to defend this base. Listening next to you is your early warning operator, whose job is to notify you of imminent attack. There's 5 people inside a vehicle and 5 people outside of a vehicle around these, a total of, as I said, 44. We believe that this is the largest single Patriot engagement in U.S. military history.
I know your home state of California has the highest number of military veterans in the country. So we appreciate them. I do want to say that when you hear that level of detail, it's hard not to thank everybody who's ever put that uniform on, especially the youngest among us who did it last weekend.
Well, that's where you and I have something in common. Both our dads, right? My dad in the Korean War. Yeah, we're both military kids. Listen, I want facts, right? And I want journalists to put out facts. And I do think somebody's like, okay, I've got this and I've got this fast. But a lot of the stuff that we have coming out is fast. So let me quote the president himself when we talk about, of course I have to put my password in because I've got to quote it, right? The president said, quote, "The intelligence was very inconclusive. The intelligence says we don't know. It could have been very severe. That's what the intelligence says. So I guess that's correct. But I think we can take the we don't know. It was very severe. It was obliteration." Here's the thing. The top brass at the Pentagon have said to have a really deep dive into this is going to take a long time. We're not going to know. Did Iran move any of the uranium, specifically Fordo? Can they dig Fordo out? They're talking about just water and electrical issues once they dig out. How long will that take? And I think not just the American, citizens and voters, but certainly the House and the Senate have a right and a necessity to know all of those details and those specifics. And that's what I saw coming out as an American in questions after that leak. Leak, terrible, but what the leak did is prompted more questions to get more specifics.
Can I just say,
with regard to how bad were they hit and how long would it take, and did they move any of that uranium before this bomb?
Leslie, I would say this just real quickly, and Guy, I'll go to you next. None of what you just asked should be predicated on something that was leaked, because it's not necessary. I ask those questions too. I want all those answers.
Oh no, I agree with you. You don't need the leak to have that.
I don't predicate it on, well, somebody told me that.
Those are the questions I asked before, and I'm still asking
that they
now.
may sort of kind of know the answer. No, I mean, you obviously want to know what happened.
I would just make a very quick point. You said when the regime starts digging out Fordo. I think it's an if, because the Israelis are going to be watching them like a hawk. They're not going to let them dig out. They've got control of the skies.
Well, no, I disagree. I would say when. All right.
Last word?
Well, and I would also echo what Guy said earlier, which is that the top scientists there in the country who were developing this nuclear program were all taken out as well. So even if they move some of that uranium, even if there's anything left, it'll be a long time, thank God, before they get their hands on anything that's concerning to the world, I think. said that the DIA report was low confidence intel. Can you share what other assessments are currently underway to get to the bottom of just how effective these strikes were?
Yes, well, I can assure you what the CIA director said, that when we look at the entirety of the intelligence that we have to this date, it concludes that these strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities were absolutely successful. It was a total obliteration, as the president said, and not only does our own intelligence say that, but also the Iranian foreign minister has said that. We saw Israel conclude the same thing based on their own intelligence. We also had the United Nations say that as well. So I think the only other time the United Nations, Israel, Iran, and the United States has agreed on something is that the sky is blue, but they all agree that Iran's nuclear facilities were completely demolished. And I would just like to reemphasize, you mentioned this was a low confidence preliminary intelligence assessment, and the entirety of that assessment was not leaked to the media. Only tidbits of that assessment were leaked to CNN, and we have seen this playbook run before, where you have people in the intelligence community, or perhaps on Capitol Hill, we don't know, but I believe the FBI is investigating to find out who that leaker was, because it's illegal and they should be held accountable for that, leaked bits and pieces of an intel assessment to push a false narrative. And it's to the same reporter, I will add, Natasha Bertrand of CNN, who has done this in the past. In 2020, it was Natasha Bertrand who had 51 intelligence analysts falsely lie to her, but she still put it on paper for some reason, that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. We all know that's not true, right? We can all agree on that now. That was a lie from the intelligence community. Also in 2020, this same reporter, Natasha Bertrand, wrote that a top intel agency ruled out the man-made lab leak theory of the coronavirus origins. Again, the president was right about that. This reporter wrote a lie from the intelligence community to seek a narrative she wanted to prove, and guess what? We now know that's the truth. Also, in 2024, Bertrand pushed the suckers and losers hoax. She also pushed the fine people hoax, which was taking the president's words purposely out of context. And then last October, and I believe this is notable, Natasha Bertrand published an article in Politico from the intelligence agency. She said that John Ratcliffe was speaking without any evidence when he said Iran was attempting to undermine President Trump's presidential campaign. And then we, of course, found out that was absolutely true. In fact, the Biden administration declassed an intel report which said they had high confidence that Iran had done exactly what Ratcliffe alleged. They did run an influence campaign to hurt President Trump's candidacy. In fact, we know the Iranians tried to take President Trump's life. And so this is a reporter who has been unfortunately used by people who dislike Donald Trump in this government to push fake and false narratives. She should be ashamed of herself. And that's not what reporting is. Journalism is trying to find the facts and the truth. And this week we saw this same reporter being used to push a fake narrative to try to undermine the President of the United States, and more importantly, the brave fighter pilots who conducted one of the most successful operations in United States history. And I think the American people fully know that this operation was a complete and total success.
No, we don't.
Back to our top story now. The Trump administration refuting a leaked Pentagon report that claimed the U.S. strikes had little impact on Iran's
the intelligence agency. She said that John Ratcliffe was speaking without any evidence when he said Iran was attempting to. And then we, of course, found out that was absolutely true. In fact, the Biden administration declassed an intel report which said they had high confidence that Iran had done exactly what Ratcliffe alleged. They did run an influence campaign to hurt President Trump's candidacy. In fact, we know the Iranians tried to take President Trump's life. And so this is a reporter who has been unfortunately used by people who dislike Donald Truth. And this week we saw this same reporter being used to push a fake narrative to try to undermine the President of the United States, and more importantly, the brave fighter pilots who conducted one of the most successful operations in United States history. And I think the American people fully know that this operation was a complete and total success.
Back to our top story now. The Trump administration refuting a leaked Pentagon report that claimed the U.S. strikes had little impact on Iran's nuclear program. Joining us now is House Intel Chair and Arkansas Republican Congressman Rick Crawford. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. So where are you and where is your thinking on all of this? What should people believe?
Well, I think we buried the lead here. Look, the strikes were wildly successful, and what did they accomplish? It's less about the damage they inflicted on the installations there and more about what they did to bring Iran to the table. The strike led to peace in the Middle East. We can get past all this rhetoric about how much damage was inflicted or was not inflicted, and I think that's the real point of the story.
But some of the fallout appears to be, Congressman, that the president is maybe not going to be so free in sharing classified information with Congress. This, according to Axios, quote, Trump to limit sharing classified info with Congress after leak on Iran bombing damage. We are declaring a war on leakers, a senior White House official said on Wednesday. Now, Caroline Leavitt said she didn't know if this leak came off Capitol Hill or if it came from someone within the DIA or someone else. But what do you think about the president and the notion that he's not going to be so quickly sharing classified information with you folks on Congress?
Well, I understand his feeling on that. I mean, I'm equally outraged about leaks wherever they came from, and it's our responsibility in my lane and as chairman of this committee to make sure that we're doing everything we can to be good stewards of classified information. So we are redoubling our efforts at the committee.
So y'all want to be able to lie and nobody expose y'all.
At least on my watch, making sure that we're doing everything right. But I understand the president's sentiment, but we have to be also conscious of the fact that Article 2 gives us authority to oversee the executive branch, and so there's a balance there that we need to strike, but we need to show the president that we're taking this seriously, and we are, and that's why we're redoubling our efforts to let him know that we can be trusted with classified material.
Well, Congressman, as you know, this White House continues to be pressed by the media on whether or not any of the uranium that was in Fort O, for example, was moved to begin with. Noting the trucks that were pulling up. Caroline Leavitt was asked about this just a few moments ago, and here's how the White House is responding to that. Listen.
So we were watching closely, and there was no indication to the United States that any of that enriched uranium was moved prior to the strike.
So are you satisfied with that answer, or do you still have more questions about that?
Well, I can tell you this, that the president gets more and more in-depth intelligence than I get. And so if the president is satisfied with that, I'm satisfied with that, and I'm not going to question that.
So one other thing, and that is that there's supposed to be a classified briefing happening, and Democrats have been hopping up and down complaining about the fact that it hasn't happened yet. Now Senator Schumer is hopping up and down about the fact that he's only going to get the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State there before his committee. Listen to what he said.
Now they're trying to get away with sending only the Secretary of State and Defense for tomorrow, instead of the usual intelligence officials that attend the briefings. Let's be very clear. Briefing from only the Secretaries of State and Defense would be woefully insufficient. If they are the only ones in attendance, they will only parrot whatever the president wants them to say.
What's your response to that, Congressman?
That's sort of par for the course for Senator Schumer, so I try not to pay much attention to what he says.
All right, Congressman, I appreciate your time and joining us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
All right. Boy, wouldn't that be something? All right, for more on the investigation into the leaks, let's bring in John Yoo, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and former law clerk for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. See, here's what Caroline Leavitt said about the leak just a short time ago in the briefing. Listen here.
Leaking top secret classified intelligence is a crime, and people need to be held accountable for that crime. This administration wants to ensure
it's
that
also a lie, and y'all need to be held
irresponsible
accountable
hands.
for
We need to get to the
lying.
bottom of it, and we need to strengthen that process to protect our national security and protect the American public.
So the provenance of this document was the Defense Intelligence Agency. We don't know where the leak came from. The contents of the report were later confirmed to Fox News. I don't know if it was actually declassified, but it would seem at the moment that the leak occurred, this was classified information. So what are the remedies here under the statutes?
So there's something called the Espionage Act.
So if the information wasn't true, then it ain't leaked information. So it has to be true in order for y'all to be saying it's linked information. So he lied. Again, it don't matter how you spin it. Because if it wasn't true, it's not leaked. That means that they lied too. So you just mad because it was leaked to expose that y'all were lying. Period.
Which is the primary law that the Justice Department uses against leakers of classified information.
If it's fake, it's not classified information.
Defense Intelligence Agency or the Pentagon.
So it's the truth.
It's classified.
You
The
lied.
report is classified top secret, if not higher. Then they could be prosecuted and punished with up to 10 years in prison and a fine. It is actually the most serious thing that the government can do, other than charging someone with treason for releasing classified information that's so important and it is so important to the national defense. If you're Iran and you see that report or you learn information about that report, you will have some idea about what kind of intelligence assets we have in Iran, whether we can detect or not detect information. So this is exactly the kind of thing the Espionage Act is designed to punish.
Right, because as I recall, the report said that through visual reports and SIGINT, which is signals intelligence, so that may in some way be nodding to sources and methods.
Yes, and in fact, that could be another violation. Is one thing you're releasing the report. The other thing is you're releasing information about how we're able to intercept electronic communications on the other side, what you call SIGINT, signals intelligence. That itself is another violation of the Espionage Act. So whoever did this is in a lot of trouble because you're talking about 20 years now in prison and fines. But we should also focus on, think about how this is going to harm the way our government makes national security decisions. When we're going to have the next bombing attack, we have to do the next damage assessment. This is going to cause problems for us actually credibly thinking about, did we cause enough damage? Should we go back? People are going to be reticent. They're not going to be candid in these documents if they're going to get leaked out into the open.
So the FBI is looking into this. The Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche says that he is prepared to bring journalists and other correspondents in to ask them questions about where this leak might have come from. And he says that nobody is immune to this because there's a chance maybe it came off Capitol Hill, we don't know. He said that no one is immune from criminal liability for putting the safety of the United States at risk. But then there's the chain of custody kind of thing. So if it came out of the DIA, that you believe would be a crime. What if some lawmaker who was briefed on it released the information to a journalist? Would that be a crime? Is it a crime to publish it?
John, any Fox News host that needs legal representation, I'll give you a discount. But this is actually a very serious issue that the Justice Department, when I worked at the Justice Department, we had to grapple with this exact issue. The statute, Todd Blanche is right, the statute does not say journalists are off limits, Senate aides are off limits. It just says anyone who gets classified information, they're not authorized to handle it, and they release it or pass it on, and they intend to harm the United States, that's 10 years in jail. So the Justice Department has historically not gone after media organizations, not gone after hosts, because you would have a First Amendment claim. The courts have never upheld it, but you would have a First Amendment claim. I didn't steal anything. I was just doing my job as a member of the press to report.
But certainly we've seen in the past that there have been some famous cases of people being jailed. Jack Teixeira, who is the Massachusetts Air National Guard service member, sentenced to 15 years for leaking hundreds of classified documents online. Bradley Manning, sentenced to 35 years for a role in WikiLeaks. So these are service members. These were people who got this out of the government servers. So we know what happens to them potentially. We'll see what happens if you're sort of two or three people down the line, I guess.
Yeah. The point is the government can best police this by punishing the people in the government.
Against the woke, communist, anti-Semite party elites to be New York City's next mayor. The great one, this is going to be special. Mark Levin, he will respond. Also, House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, he will be here after signing off on a brand new subpoena delivered to Jill Biden's so-called work husband, who may have taken a turn as president auto pen. Well, He'll now be compelled to testify before the House as part of Comer's probe into a real constitutional crisis. But first, our top story tonight, a new low for Democrats and the legacy media mob. They don't know what the word shame means. Now, for the past week, many on the left were blatantly rooting against our military, our country. God forbid Donald Trump does something right, we can praise him, and proudly touting a ridiculous claim that the U.S. strikes, I'm talking about the massive 14 bunker buster
£1,000-pound bomb. They are the
You're a proud democratic socialist. Do you think that is a platform that would work for
Marxist Islamists? They know how to run the world. They don't know how to run anything. They don't even know how to fix a toilet or to change their oil.
The prosecution delivered their fiery closing argument in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial, highlighting why these are episodes of sex trafficking, why the evidence proves Combs operated a criminal enterprise, and how he directed and arranged multiple instances of transporting people for prostitution. We will break down the highlights of this closing argument right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right, Morgan & Morgan, they're investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or go to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. Closing arguments are officially underway in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial. In fact, the prosecution just wrapped up their closing argument. Remember, this is the last chance for each side to summarize the evidence in this case, present their final conclusion, their narrative for the jury. And it's important. It's important because there's a lot for the jury to consider over these past few weeks. It is a complicated case. There is a lot of evidence. There's a lot of testimony. And closings are the last time the jurors will hear from the attorneys before they begin their deliberations. So we begin with the prosecution's closing argument that was delivered by Assistant United States Attorney Christy Slavic, outlining why the jury should find Combs guilty of 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, 1 with respect to Cassie Ventura Fine, 1 with respect to Jane, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Again, 1 with respect to Cassie, 1 with respect to Jane. I want to bring on right now Law and Crimes reporter Elizabeth Milner, who was inside that courtroom for all of those arguments today. Elizabeth, great to see you. Want to take this piece by piece. Let's start it off with racketeering conspiracy. The top charge, arguably the most complicated charge in the mix, Harry's life in prison, okay? So there's a lot at stake here. The prosecutor definitely wanted to make it clear for the jury. How did she outline, let's start this, how did she outline that this is a criminal organization, that there was a criminal agreement? Let's start there before we even move into the underlying predicate crimes that the prosecution needs to prove.
Yeah, so right off the bat, Christy Slavic is really talking about count 1, of course, that being racketeering conspiracy, aka RICO. And just right off the bat, she's telling the jury over the last several weeks, you learned about Sean Combs and then kidnapping an employee, forced labor, arson, bribery, plus brutal crimes are at the heart of the case. She also said, you know, across all of these comes the defendant using his power and violence to get what he wants, and that he doesn't take no for an answer. And so right off at the top of her closing argument, the jury has shown exhibit photos, one of March 2016 Intercontinental Hotel still image from that surveillance video where you can kind of see Cassie on the ground after she was initially physically assaulted by Sean Combs on that videotape. And then also the government talked about Sean Combs kicking, choking, and slapping Jane and forcing her into a freak-off, specifically pointing to the instance that happened in June of 2024. And so, you know, the government was like, you know, these instances are separated by 8 years, but they're kind of saying they're one and the same. But I think the most interesting part of just the beginning of the closing argument by the prosecution is that Christy Slavic is like, Sean Combs has a small army of personal staff. No one could stop him. He uses inner circle and money to cover up his crimes, and even referred to his assistants as foot soldiers and other things like that. So really kind of pointing out how the assistants, how those who are in Sean Combs' inner circle really kind of helped build this case of racketeering conspiracy against the defendant.
Yeah, that he's the leader of this criminal organization, that the assistants, the security, they helped pull off the freak-offs, they knew it was wrong, they would go to people, they knew about the sex tapes, they got drugs for freak-offs, Christina Corum, she knew what was going on, D-Rock got ice for Cassie's black eye, so I get it, right? This idea that everybody was on the same page. Now, for the prosecution to win this charge, they have to prove at least 2 underlying predicate crimes, right? And you tell me what stood out the most. Was it forced labor? Was it kidnapping? Was it arson? Which, by the way, there was a whole back and forth yesterday. Oh, is arson and kidnapping still part of the case? Yes, it is. They may have they might have decided to not move forward with attempted arson or attempted kidnapping, but they're still moving forward with actual kidnapping and arson or conspiracy to commit these crimes. So which of the underlying crimes really stood out to you today? I know the prosecution addressed all of them, but was it forced labor? Was it the drug offenses? Was it arson? Was it kidnapping? Was it bribery? Which were the ones that you think if the jury has to decide, oh, these are the 2 we're going to find them guilty of, or we think these are the predicate crimes for racketeering, this pattern of criminal activity, which were some of the ones that stood out to you?
Well, to your point, Jesse, the prosecution laying out again that the government only has to prove 2 of these acts, but as they're listing drug distribution, kidnapping, arson, bribery, sex trafficking, forced labor, witness tampering, interstate transportation for prostitution, you really could pick any of them because I feel like the government made very strong cases for all of them. But some of the ones that really kind of stood out to me, and I think for maybe a different way than maybe people think, was kind of drug distribution, because I think a lot of people, in terms of just the drugs and overall kind of components that go to it, that people think, Sean Combs had to be transporting, kilos and large quantities of drugs, but really the government was kind of laying out that delivering or passing on drugs kind of count as distribution. And so I think Christy Slavic made a pretty strong argument where she said a special ingredients that, talking about the drugs, were required for freak-offs. So each and every time she's kind of talking about the predicate act, she's talking about all the players involved. So in terms of drug distribution, she specifically talked about D-Rock, KK, and Fahim Muhammad. And so the 2 elements that kind of go with that is that the co-conspirators distributed the drugs, but also the second element being that the co-conspirator distributed the drugs knowingly. And so she listed all the drugs out because drugs was something that was very common throughout all the testimony that the witnesses had. So she talked about cocaine, meth, ketamine, oxycodone, Xanax, MDMA, GHB, 2C, and mushrooms as well. And so she said that the quantity is not relevant. It's not an element of this crime. And so she says, the jury has heard a number of names, including Guido, One Stop, Baby Girl, as some of the drug dealers that were used, but also just the money that kind of goes and is attached to just, the assistants reaching out to KK or Fahim Muhammad, talking about reimbursement for payments such as $450 of a balance for drugs or $780 to go towards the personal Gucci items. And as they talked about throughout a lot of witness testimony, the Gucci items normally refer to the drugs that were in a specific Gucci bag that Sean Combs always had on his person, or that the assistants were required to carry just near and around Sean Combs. But even in terms of just distributing the drugs to others, the prosecution named a number of people that it kind of falls under there, where it's including Cassie and Jane and Carrie Morgan and Bonna and Mia, and how Mia and Brendan Paul specifically were even made to kind of partake in this drug use. Mia testified that she kind of was given a different batch of all these different drugs, and it was kind of like a guessing game of which drug was which drug, and she had to take a line of it. Whereas Brendan Paul talked about the first time he did drugs outside of marijuana was 2C with Sean Combs in order to kind of prove his loyalty. But I think another big thing, Jesse, was just the kidnapping aspect, because to your point, a lot of people are like, oh my God, there's no more kidnapping. Oh my God, there's no more arson. But the prosecution laid out about 3 instances of kidnapping. One in January of 2009 when Cassie's face was stomped on and she was held at a hotel because Sean Combs got upset that she was talking to a producer, and Cassie drunkenly punched Sean Combs in the face, and then he physically assaulted her, and that Sean Combs forced her to stay in a hotel for a week, and that Bonds, the security guard, told her that she couldn't leave that hotel. And so the prosecution was like, Cassie didn't consent to staying at the London hotel during this particular alleged incident of kidnapping. Then there was another time where they brought it back to 2004 here in New York City with Capricorn Clark and the lie detector test after the jewelry went missing, and how the government said a person restricted victims' movements by confining her to a place. And so the prosecution laid out that the man who administered the test said if she refused, she would be thrown into East River. That was something that Capricorn Clark had even testified to. And then obviously the biggest instance was December of 2011 with the whole Kid Cudi kind of aspect, where Capricorn Clark says that a gun was pointed at her face by Sean Combs. She was forced into this car and was driven over to Kid Cudi's home, all because Sean Combs was upset that he being Kid Cudi, was seeing President terrifying. But that Capricorn had even testified again that Sean Combs held a gun at her. She didn't want to go with him, and that all the players involved with that particular instance of alleged kidnapping was Capricorn Clark, Rue, who was a security guard, Sean Combs, how they drove over to Kid Cudi's home, and Capricorn Clark didn't consent. Now, obviously, Jesse, there's a number of other interesting points where you talk about bribery and other things too that are very interesting, but those to me are the ones that definitely stood out the most.
Yeah, bribery. Eddie Garcia, the hotel security guard, he was allegedly paid $100,000 that he split with others to hand over the videotape of Sean Combs reportedly beating Cassie. I thought that was a significant point. Forced labor, the idea of Mia, his personal assistant, being allegedly sexually assaulted by Sean Combs, but also the idea of
same as
the two
President
victims
Trump.
in this case, Jane and Cassie.
Ain't that ironic?
Forced to
both in New York.
Sex acts, right? This is forced labor costs. So let's talk about Jane and let's talk about Cassie. Let's take a piece by
Just like Trump.
They each make up, as I said, individual sex trafficking counts and individual counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. But when we talk about sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, let's talk about Jane. What did the prosecutor say today in closing arguments to say that Jane is a victim of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion? What did she say about that?
Well, I think, Jesse, the sex trafficking aspect, as it specifically pertains to Jane, is pretty interesting because the government says you only have to find one instance of sex trafficking. So sure, the government has a very long list of all these different flights and locations and hotel rooms, all to kind of point out that all of these instances of hotel nights were possibly alleged sex trafficking, but only the jury has to find one particular instance, and then the defendant, you know, in the perfect way the government probably wants, is guilty of sex trafficking. But as it comes to Jane, and by the way, whenever they were talking about Jane, the gallery screen that we're able to see that kind of shows the public and the media and everyone who's sitting inside the courtroom, that was completely shut off. So only the jury is seeing these particular exhibits, the text messages, the photos, as it pertains to Jane, mainly because, you know, Jane, she testified under a pseudonym and they just want to protect her privacy just a little bit more. But in terms of just the different stages of sex trafficking, the government said that the first stage was Jane kind of learning about the drugs and the outfits and putting pornography on, because they were saying that Sean Combs kind of groomed Jane into sex trafficking. So they say that first stage, again, being the drugs, the outfits, putting pornography on, something that kind of Diddy enjoyed according to her testimony. But she said the second stage was the fantasy talk, and how the fantasy talk kind of pertained to Jane with other men, and that Sean Combs made it happen eventually. And then that third stage was using a payment of rent, because as we know, Sean Combs was paying for her rent $10,000 a month, which we learned during the trial that he's still paying for even at this time, but that payment of rent was used as leverage. And so Christy Slavic is like, he reminds her he can take things away from her anytime that he wants to. And so the government said that the hotel nights weren't about what Jane wanted, it was about what the defendant wanted. He made Jane sex with the entertainers because, as the defense kind of pointed out, using Jane's messages kind of in a way against her, we're saying, okay, hey, look, she's reaching out to these escorts or these entertainers all on her own, but the government is saying that Sean Combs made Jane kind of sex with these entertainers, and that Jane wanted the escorts to wear condoms. However, Sean Combs didn't want them to wear condoms, and that he would be dismissive and condescending whenever she kind of was vocal about wanting these escorts to wear protection. The government also saying throughout those months, the defendant continued to dangle different carrots in her face, such as gifts, such as trips, such as shopping. And then we heard an audio message from Sean Combs to Jane where he says, you know, I'm not going to play these games with you. You'll just have silence. We can have spats, but you need to get on your job. And the government's kind of pointing out that get on your job was her doing these hotel nights. But in terms of Jane kind of voicing her opinion about not wanting to do the hotel nights, because if you go back to her testimony at the beginning, she thought initially that it was going to be a one-time thing, that at first it was exciting and taboo, and she just wanted to pretty much please her partner. But then towards the end, she was kind of voicing that she felt like these hotel nights were all that she was used for, and that she said she was saying these things about voicing her opinions, that she was saying it for months even prior to Cassie's lawsuit.